The early evening sun was sinking below the treetops as we set up our campsite by the serene waters of Lake Willow. It was one of those perfect camping spots that seemed like it leapt right off a postcard. Tall pines, a gentle breeze, and the soft, rhythmic lapping of the lake against the shore. My mom, my 6-year-old brother Jamie, and I had been planning this weekend getaway for weeks, and the promise of 2 nights under the stars had been the highlight of our summer. Mom was pitching the tent while Jamie and I gathered firewood. He was particularly excited, hopping around the underbrush, collecting sticks and fallen branches, his laughter echoing through the trees. Every so often, he'd stop to munch on the Doritos we'd brought along, leaving cheesy fingerprints on whatever he touched. I smiled at his antics, feeling a deep, comforting sense of peace being here with my family, away from the hustle of everyday life. As dusk began to blanket the woods in its cool shadow, we heard the crunch of gravel and the low rumble of an engine. A white pickup truck rolled into view, disturbing the quiet solitude of our campsite. The truck, dusty and marked with streaks of mud, came to a stop just a few feet from where we were setting up. 3 men stepped out, each adorned with bright, white lights attached to their hats, making it difficult to see their faces clearly in the dimming light. They approached my mom with a casual demeanor that didn't quite mask an underlying assertiveness. "Evening, ma'am," one of them called out as they came closer. "Just checking in on everyone camping out here tonight. Mind if we ask a few questions?" My mom straightened up, wiping her hands on her jeans. "Of course, but who are you with exactly?" Her voice carried a note of caution that I had come to recognize over the years, a mother's instinct to protect her cubs. "Oh, we're just campground employees," another man chimed in, his tone friendly but rehearsed. "Making sure everyone's doing all right, that's all." They proceeded to ask routine questions: how long we planned to stay, if we'd seen any suspicious activity, and so forth. But their demeanor felt off. They seemed more interested in looking around our site than in our answers. Jamie had stopped his playful scampering and was now clutching the bag of Doritos, staring wide-eyed at the strangers. The joy had drained from his face, replaced by a growing unease that mirrored my own. After about 5 minutes, the men nodded to each other and backed away, still ensuring their hat lights shone in our eyes. "All right, you folks enjoy your evening," one of them said, a little too cheerfully. "Just holler if you need anything." As they drove off, the truck's tail lights flickered through the trees, and the night reclaimed its stillness. Mom watched until the red glow faded completely, then turned to us, her expression taut with worry. "Pack up your essentials," she instructed in a low tone, glancing over her shoulder. "We're going to Grandma's tonight." Confusion and disappointment mingled with my growing alarm. "But what about our weekend?" I protested softly, not wanting to scare Jamie any further. "We'll leave the tent and some gear. It'll look like we're still here," she explained quickly, her eyes scanning the surrounding woods. "I don't like this, not one bit." Without further discussion, we hurriedly packed a few clothes, grabbed our essential supplies, and locked everything else in the car. Jamie was quiet, his usual chatter reduced to nervous glances and a tight grip on his favorite stuffed bear. I helped him into the back seat, ensuring his seatbelt was securely fastened before climbing in beside him. The drive to Grandma's house was tense. Mom kept checking the rearview mirror, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. The warmth of Grandma's greeting melted some of our anxiety when we arrived, but the night was restless, filled with whispered conversations and uneasy sleep. The next morning, after recounting our strange encounter to Grandma, whose worry only deepened our own, we decided to go back to the campsite. We needed to pack up properly, and check everything was as we left it. Pulling into the clearing, the first thing we noticed was the disarray. Our belongings were scattered about, and it was clear someone had been rummaging through our stuff. Footprints led up to the tent, the zipper half open as though someone had hurriedly tried to see if we were inside. Our sleeping bags were crumpled, dirted with mud prints that certainly weren't ours. Gathering our things, we moved quickly, the unspoken fear that those men might return hanging heavy over us. As we packed the car, I couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if we hadn't left. The thought sent shivers down my spine, a chilling reminder that sometimes the serenity of nature masks dangers that are all too human. As we drove away from Lake Willow, I looked back at the picturesque scene, now tainted in my memory. The incident had left us shaken, a stark invasion of our peaceful family retreat, and a haunting question lingered. What were their intentions, and what had we narrowly escaped? The drive back from the campsite was mostly silent, each of us lost in our own thoughts. The serene landscape that had greeted us on our arrival now seemed a deceptive facade, hiding the sinister encounter that had driven us away. My mother's grip on the steering wheel didn't relax until the city's familiar landmarks began to replace the open countryside. Once home, the process of unloading the car felt automatic, robotic almost, as if by keeping our bodies busy, we could distract our minds from replaying the fears of the previous night. But every clank and rustle made me jump, and I noticed my brother clung to our mom more than usual, his small hand gripping hers whenever he could. Mom decided to report the incident to the local police station. Though she didn't expect much to come of it, given the lack of concrete evidence and the men's clever disguise as campground staff, she felt it was important to document the event. Maybe, she reasoned, if this was more than a one-time occurrence, our account could help establish a pattern, prompting further investigation. At the police station, the officer who took our statement was sympathetic, but confirmed our suspicions that without more to go on, it was unlikely anything would come of it. He advised us to avoid secluded camping spots in the future, especially those that were unofficial or poorly monitored. The drive home from the station was filled with a discussion about personal safety and the importance of being vigilant. Mom emphasized how proud she was that we had acted quickly and without protest. She explained that sometimes the world demanded a cautious approach to new experiences, a lesson I took to heart. As the days turned into weeks, the incident at Lake Willow began to fade into a dark corner of our family's history. We spoke of it less and less, focusing instead on the daily routines of work, school, and home life. Jamie returned to his cheerful self, the memories of that scary night slowly erased by days filled with friends and games. However, the experience had a lasting impact on me. I found myself more observant, more skeptical of strangers. The sense of invulnerability that many of us walk around with had been stripped away, revealing a world that was occasionally unpredictable and potentially dangerous. It was a jarring revelation for someone who had always viewed life with unbridled optimism. Months later, as autumn painted the trees with bursts of orange and red, our family decided to give camping another try. This time, we chose a well-known national park with established security measures and a reputation for family friendliness. The decision to camp again was not made lightly, but Mom insisted it was important not to let one bad experience completely dictate our actions. This trip was different. We were more cautious, choosing a spot close to other families and checking in with park officials about safety precautions. The presence of other campers, the regular patrols by park rangers, and our own heightened awareness provided a sense of security that allowed us to relax and enjoy the beauty of nature once again. Sitting around the campfire, watching the flames dance against the night sky, I reflected on how the incident had changed us. It was a stark reminder of the fragility of peace and the importance of being prepared. Yet, it also reinforced the value of resilience. We had not allowed fear to confine us or to permanently taint the joy of exploring the great outdoors. As I looked at my family's smiling faces illuminated by the campfire, I realized that life's weirdness and its wonder were often two sides of the same coin. By choosing to venture out again, we had embraced its full spectrum. The wilderness, with all its unpredictability, was once again a place of joy and not just a backdrop for fear. We never did find out who those men were or what their intentions might have been. Sometimes, I catch myself wondering about it when we plan our trips, but it no longer holds the power it once did. We had learned, we had adapted, and we had overcome. Our return to camping didn't just signify a continuation of an old family tradition. It marked a new chapter of cautious yet unabated adventure. It was a testament to our collective strength and a reaffirmation that no matter the challenges, we would face them together, always emerging a little wiser and a lot more united. It was May 2009, a month etched into my memory with stark clarity, punctuated by the end of a nearly 3-year relationship with my girlfriend. We had made the ambitious move from Calgary to Toronto, hoping for a fresh start, but instead found ourselves awkwardly navigating the tense atmosphere of a shared apartment post-breakup. We were strangers in a sprawling city, connected only by the remnants of a failed relationship. Amidst this personal turmoil, my buddy Mark, whom I met at the university we both attended, tossed me a lifeline. A weekend camping and fishing trip. Eager to escape the city and clear my head, I grabbed the opportunity without hesitation. Mark had grown up in a picturesque area about an hour outside Toronto, a place called Meadowvale. It boasted lush forests and sprawling fields, crisscrossed by streams and creeks, perfect for our getaway. We chose to set up camp by Grindstone Creek, renowned among local anglers for its rich fish stocks and close proximity to verdant wetlands. In retrospect, our campsite selection, a secluded farmer's field, was probably not strictly legal, a minor trespass in our quest for peace. Surrounded by nature's beauty, we spent our day casting lines and sharing stories, the hours marked by the occasional cheer of a good catch and the crack of craft beer cans. As dusk fell, the scenery transformed with the setting sun casting long shadows over the water. We gathered around a modest campfire, the flames flickering against the twilight. Dinner was a simple affair of roasted potatoes and hot dogs, the kind of meal that tastes best when eaten outdoors, under the expansive canopy of the sky. The night deepened, and by midnight, tired from the day's activities and the warmth of the fire, we retreated to our shared tent. Mark drifted off immediately, lulled by the natural silence of the rural night. I wasn't as fortunate. Restlessness kept me awake, so I lay there, scrolling through my phone, seeking distraction. It must have been around 1:30 a.m. when a strange noise pierced the quiet, a high-pitched yipping sound, unsettling in its persistence. At first, I thought it was a coyote. Having grown up in Calgary, where coyotes were more mischievous than dangerous, I wasn't initially afraid. But as the sound continued, drawing nearer, it morphed into something unnervingly human. The anxiety I battled daily began to flare up, each yip tightening the knot of fear in my stomach. I nudged Mark awake, hoping he hadn't heard it, but the sound had roused him too. We lay there for a moment, trying to decide what to do. We had come unprepared for wildlife encounters, with nothing more than our fishing gear and the flashlight on my phone. Mark, more out of bravery than wisdom, decided to confront whatever was out there. He crawled to the tent flap, unzipping it just enough to poke the flashlight out. The beam cut through the darkness like a knife, and for a brief moment, there was silence. Then, stumbling back into the tent, his face drained of color, he muttered, "It's not a coyote. It's a dude." In my state of heightened anxiety, I might have laughed if not for the genuine fear in Mark's eyes. The eerie noises hadn't ceased. They were now interspersed with what sounded like howling laughter. Mark insisted I look for myself, to confirm he wasn't hallucinating. With a racing heart, I inched towards the tent flap, barely daring to breathe. Peering out, my eyes adjusted to the scant moonlight, and there he was, a man, not 10 feet from our tent. He swayed slightly, his features obscured by a baseball cap, and shockingly, he was clad in women's lingerie. The absurdity of the sight did little to ease the terror that gripped me. Retreating into the tent, Mark and I debated our next move. Eventually, mustering what courage we could, we began to yell at the man to leave. "Excuse me, can you go away? We're trying to sleep here," Mark shouted. There was a moment of chilling silence, then footsteps charged towards our tent. They stopped abruptly outside, and in a panic, we threatened to call the police. The footsteps receded slowly, heading toward the road. Neither of us slept after that, waiting anxiously for dawn, when we could make our escape from what had turned into a nightmare. The drive back was quiet, both of us processing the night's events, embarrassed by our fear but relieved to be safe. We rarely spoke of it afterward, each of us preferring to leave that disturbing encounter in the past where it belonged. The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon when Mark and I hastily packed up our campsite. The air was cool and misty, a stark contrast to the lingering tension from the night's eerie encounter. We moved quickly, eager to put distance between us and the field that had turned from a peaceful retreat into the backdrop of our unsettling experience. As we loaded the last of our gear into the car, the quiet of the morning was a bittersweet reminder of why we had come out here in the first place. To find solace and escape from our urban stresses, not to add new ones. The drive back to Toronto was mostly silent. The radio played softly in the background, a mundane soundtrack to our heavy thoughts. We were both lost in our own reflections, replaying the events of the night over in our minds. Had we overreacted? Was the man simply a local oddity, harmless and misunderstood? Or had we narrowly escaped a dangerous situation? The questions circled in my head, unanswered. As we entered the city, the familiar sights and sounds of urban life felt strangely comforting. The normalcy of bustling streets and tall buildings was a welcome return to reality after what had felt like a brush with the surreal. Mark dropped me off at my apartment, and we shared a look that said more than words could. This trip had changed something between us, a shared ordeal that was both bonding and isolating. We parted with a simple nod, each retreating to our separate lives to recover from the weekend's shock. Back in my apartment, the remnants of my relationship loomed large. The space felt more confining than ever, filled with memories and regrets. I spent the day in a fog, the events of the previous night merging with the emotional turmoil of my breakup. I realized then that I needed to make a change, to move forward not just from the unsettling encounter, but from the chains of my past relationship that still held me back. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into my studies and started looking for a new place to live. The city was both overwhelming and invigorating, a place of endless possibilities and unforeseen challenges. I occasionally caught up with Mark, but our conversations were mostly superficial. The memory of that night lingered like a shadow, unspoken yet ever present. Months passed, and with the distance of time, the fear began to fade, replaced by a vague unease whenever I recalled the man's haunting figure in the moonlight. I used the experience as a catalyst for personal growth, pushing myself to overcome my anxiety and embrace the unpredictability of life. I learned to laugh more freely, to appreciate the moment, and to face challenges head-on, rather than retreating into fear. Eventually, I moved into a new apartment, a small but bright space that felt like a fresh start. I decorated it with symbols of my aspirations, each piece a statement of my intent to live fully and fearlessly. I made new friends, explored new hobbies, and gradually, the city felt like home. Years later, I can still recall the bizarre encounter by Grindstone Creek with vivid clarity. It remains a story I share with friends, often around a campfire, where the flames seem to ward off the darkness of the memory. It's a tale that elicits gasps and laughter, a reminder of how quickly adventure can turn into misadventure, and of the mysterious, unpredictable nature of life itself. As I look back now, I see that night not just as a moment of fear, but as a turning point. It was then that I learned the true strength of facing the unknown, not with trepidation, but with resilience. Life, much like the forests around Meadowvale, is wild and unpredictable, but it is also full of beauty and opportunities for growth, if only we are brave enough to step into the unknown.